What if the biggest fight in the WNBA right now isn't happening on the court, but behind closed doors? What if the real war isn't between teams, but between the players and the very union that's supposed to represent them? Because something explosive just happened inside the WNBPA. A meeting that was supposed to be routine turned heated. Voices were raised. Positions shifted. And suddenly, the narrative of total unity started cracking in real time. For months, fans were told the players were aligned, united, locked in, ready to fight for a stronger collective bargaining agreement. A near-unanimous strike authorization vote back in December made it look airtight, solid, unshakable. But now, reports are surfacing that some players are backing off, that internal disagreements are growing, that younger stars may not be seeing eye to eye with veteran leadership. And when agents start stepping in behind the scenes, you know something serious is unfolding. Add to that the Caitlin Clark effect, record ratings, ticket surges, media money pouring in, and the stakes get even higher. The league is growing fast. Momentum is real. And the clock is ticking toward a deadline that could determine whether the season starts on time or explodes into chaos. So the real question isn't just whether there will be a strike. The real question is this. Is the WNBPA losing control of its own locker room? Because what happened in that virtual meeting changed everything. And once you see the full picture, you'll understand why this moment could reshape the entire future of the league. It was supposed to be a standard virtual meeting. Just another scheduled discussion about the ongoing CBA negotiations between the WNBA and the Players' Union. But according to multiple reports, it didn't stay calm for long. The tone quickly shifted. What was described publicly as spirited and passionate was, behind the scenes, reportedly tense. Heated. At times uncomfortable. Words like tough weren't accidental. They were signals. Because when union leadership uses language like that to describe an internal meeting, it usually means one thing: disagreement. And not small disagreement either. This wasn't about minor contract wording. This was about strategy. About risk. About whether the union should actually move forward with a strike if negotiations stall. Back in December, the players authorized a potential strike in what was described as a near-unanimous vote. That sent a powerful message. It showed strength, leverage, solidarity, at least on the surface. But here's where things get complicated. Sources now suggest that some players have changed their stance. Think about that for a second. A strike authorization is serious. It's not symbolic. It gives the union's executive committee, a small group of player leaders, the power to call a strike if they believe negotiations aren't progressing fairly. That's a massive amount of influence concentrated in a handful of hands. And now, not everyone may be comfortable with how that power could be used. Because the league reportedly told players that if an agreement isn't reached by a certain deadline, the season could face delays. Expansion drafts, free agency periods, training camp schedules. The entire off-season timeline hinges on these negotiations. So suddenly this isn't abstract anymore. It's real. It's immediate. And players are starting to calculate the risks differently. For a veteran near the end of her career, missing games might be worth the gamble if it means squeezing out better long-term terms. But for a younger player, a rookie, someone on a shorter contract trying to build momentum in the fastest-growing era the league has ever seen, that calculation changes. The meeting reportedly revealed that not everyone sees the path forward the same way. Some players are fully committed to striking if necessary. Others reportedly want to avoid that outcome at almost any cost. And when those viewpoints collide, tension builds. Union leadership publicly insists that debate is healthy. That disagreement doesn't equal division. That passionate discussion means engagement. And to a degree, that's true. But here's what stands out. If everything was perfectly unified, we wouldn't even be hearing about internal friction. The fact that it leaked. The fact that agents later got involved. The fact that players are now openly saying, fair looks different to different people. That tells you this isn't minor. It suggests something deeper. Because fairness is subjective. And when millions of dollars, revenue sharing, housing guarantees, salary caps, and long-term league growth are all on the table, subjective differences turn into fault lines fast. One of the biggest sticking points in negotiations is the proposed salary cap number, reportedly sitting at $5.6 million, with no movement from the league on revenue sharing adjustments. That's significant. Revenue sharing is the long game. It's about how much players participate in the league's overall financial growth. And right now, the league is undeniably growing. Attendance numbers are up. Media rights deals have increased in value. Sponsorships are surging. Expansion franchises are being added. The pie is getting bigger, so players want a bigger slice. But here's the strategic dilemma. Do you push aggressively right now and risk slowing momentum, or do you secure gains while the league is booming and negotiate again later from an even stronger position? That philosophical split may be at the heart of this entire clash. Some players appear ready to hold firm, even if it means a season delay. Others may feel the current momentum, fueled in part by new superstar attention and record-breaking exposure, is too valuable to risk disrupting. And when that tension surfaced in the meeting, it reportedly created a visible divide. Not screaming, not chaos, but friction. And friction inside a union during high-stakes negotiations is something league executives definitely notice. Because if management senses hesitation among players, leverage shifts instantly. That's the hidden danger of internal disagreement. Once doubt creeps in, negotiating power weakens, which makes this moment even more delicate than most fans realize. This isn't just about one meeting. It's about trust. Trust in leadership. Trust in strategy. Trust in timing. And when that trust starts being questioned, even quietly, the ripple effects can be enormous. But this tension didn't appear out of nowhere. It's connected to something much bigger. A generational shift that's been building for months. And that's where the story gets even more complicated. Because this isn't just a negotiation battle. It might be a battle between two different visions of the league's future. And once you understand that divide, everything else starts to make sense. This isn't just about contracts. It's about timelines. Because when that meeting got tense, it wasn't simply players arguing over numbers. It was something deeper, a clash between two completely different realities inside the same league. On one side, you have veteran players, athletes who fought through years when the WNBA struggled for mainstream visibility, players who dealt with smaller arenas, limited media coverage, and salaries that barely reflected their value. They've spent years pushing for better treatment, better travel, better pay structures. For them, this CBA isn't just another negotiation. It's a culmination. It's the moment to demand everything they believe the league owes them. And then there's the other side, the younger wave. Players entering the league during its fastest growth period ever. Players stepping into sold-out arenas. National broadcasts. Exploding social media engagement. Record-breaking rookie jersey sales. The spotlight is brighter than it has ever been. And momentum like that feels fragile. Because momentum doesn't always last. Younger players may see this moment differently. Instead of squeezing every possible concession right now, some may feel the smarter move is to protect the growth surge, keep the product on the floor, and ride the expansion wave. That's not weakness. That's a different strategy. And when those two strategies collide, tension builds fast. Veterans may see hesitation as settling. Young players may see aggressive strike threats as risky. Now add Caitlin Clark into this equation. Whether people want to admit it or not, her arrival shifted the economic conversation around the league. Ratings jumped. Ticket demand surged. National debate intensified. Corporate sponsors leaned in. Media companies paid attention. The WNBA suddenly found itself in a different financial atmosphere. And that changes leverage. Some veterans may argue this is precisely why now is the time to push hard. If the league is benefiting from new star power, then players deserve a bigger revenue share immediately. But younger players, especially those benefiting directly from this attention, may worry about disrupting that growth. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. A delayed season doesn't just hurt ownership. It hurts exposure. It hurts rhythm. It risks casual fans drifting away. And younger players who are still building their brands may not want that interruption. That's where the philosophical split deepens. Veterans are negotiating from years of frustration. Young stars are negotiating from opportunity. Both positions are valid, but they are not identical. And when fairness looks different to different people, as one player reportedly said, that's not just a throwaway line. That's a signal. Because what does fair mean? Does fair mean maximizing total compensation immediately? Does fair mean ensuring housing benefits are locked in permanently? Does fair mean pushing revenue-sharing percentages higher? Or does fair mean protecting the league's growth trajectory and negotiating again from a stronger financial base in the next CBA? Those are completely different interpretations. And once those interpretations surfaced in that virtual meeting, the illusion of total unity became harder to maintain. There's also another layer most fans aren't considering: career length. A veteran in year 10 is calculating differently than a rookie in year 1. If you're nearing the back end of your career, you may prioritize immediate financial guarantees. You may not have the luxury of waiting for another negotiation cycle. But if you're 23 years old and just entered a booming league, you might think long-term. You might believe the next CBA could be even bigger if the league continues expanding at this rate. That's not selfish. That's strategic. And when strategies differ inside a union, leadership faces a difficult balancing act. Because union leaders must represent everyone: max contract players, role players, rookies, bench contributors, stars, international players, every tier. And when interests don't align perfectly, pressure builds behind closed doors. Some reports suggest more than half of player leadership reaffirmed commitment to strike if necessary. But that wording matters. More than half isn't everyone. And in negotiations, that distinction is everything. Because if league executives sense even slight hesitation among players, they know the unity front isn't airtight. And leverage weakens. Quietly. Gradually. Dangerously. Now imagine being a younger player watching all this unfold. You see record attendance. You see national debates. You see sponsors lining up. And you're being told there's a real possibility the season could be delayed. That's a heavy calculation. Especially if you're on a rookie-scale deal and every game matters for exposure and endorsements. And here's another dynamic that doesn't get discussed enough: public perception. The league has spent the last year riding a wave of positive momentum. New fans, viral moments, cultural relevance. If negotiations break down publicly and the season stalls, the narrative could shift fast. And younger players who are hyper-aware of branding may not want to risk that shift. Meanwhile, veterans may argue that true growth requires structural fairness, not just flashy headlines. Again, both arguments hold weight. But weight on opposite ends of a scale creates instability. And instability inside a union is what makes this moment so pivotal. Because once a generational divide starts forming, even subtly, it forces players to pick sides quietly. No one wants to say it out loud. No one wants headlines screaming players divided. But friction doesn't need headlines to be real. It only needs tension. And according to those inside that meeting, tension was very real. But here's where things escalated beyond internal disagreement. Because once agents started stepping in, this stopped being a philosophical debate. It became something much bigger, something more political, and potentially more explosive. And what the agents did next, that changed the temperature completely. Internal disagreement is one thing, but when agents start getting involved, that's when you know it's no longer just locker room debate. Because shortly after that heated virtual meeting, reports surfaced that a group of agents, more than 10 of them, sent a letter to union leadership offering to help, in whatever way necessary, to get a deal done. That might sound harmless at first, but it's not small. Agents don't step into union negotiations casually. They represent individual financial interests. Endorsements, contract leverage, career timing, brand value, long-term earnings. When they sense instability that could impact their clients' futures, they move fast. And the fact that they moved at all tells you something shifted behind the scenes. Think about what that signals. If agents are reaching out to union leadership, it suggests at least some of their clients are uneasy, concerned, maybe even frustrated. Because from an agent's perspective, a delayed season isn't just about missed games. It's about stalled endorsement deals. It's about media momentum cooling off. It's about sponsorship clauses tied to appearances. It's about market visibility shrinking, especially right now. Because this isn't a quiet year in the WNBA. This is arguably the most commercially explosive period the league has seen in decades. Attendance spikes, television ratings climbing, corporate sponsors watching closely, expansion franchises entering the picture, national sports talk shows debating the league regularly. Momentum like that is rare. And rare momentum makes business people nervous when it's threatened. So when agents start nudging union leadership, it raises an uncomfortable question. Are some players worried that leadership is pushing too hard? Or worse, pushing in a direction that doesn't benefit everyone equally? Now let's zoom out for a moment. Union leadership has the authority to call a strike if they believe negotiations require it. That authority came from the near-unanimous vote months ago. But circumstances change. And when circumstances change, so do risk calculations. Back in December, authorizing a strike may have felt like necessary leverage. A show of strength. A way to signal seriousness to the league. But now, the deadline is real. The league reportedly set a timeline that could impact everything from expansion drafts to free agency to training camp. This is no longer theoretical. If a deal isn't reached, scheduling chaos follows. And chaos in a booming market can cause long-term damage. Agents understand that better than anyone, because they operate in the gray area between player loyalty and business reality. They don't just think about fairness in the abstract. They think about numbers, brand deals, national exposure, career arcs. And here's the subtle tension nobody wants to say publicly. Agents often represent players across generations. They may have a veteran pushing for maximum revenue share, and a young star pushing to protect immediate exposure. Different clients, different priorities, same negotiation. That creates a complicated web. So when agents collectively reach out to union leadership offering assistance, it can be interpreted in multiple ways. Is it collaboration? Or is it quiet pressure? Because let's be honest, agents stepping in doesn't exactly scream, everything is perfectly unified. It suggests movement beneath the surface. And movement beneath the surface can destabilize leverage. From the league's perspective, internal hesitation is information. And information is power. If management believes not all players are fully committed to striking, their urgency to compromise decreases. Negotiation dynamics shift instantly. This is why unions typically guard internal unity fiercely during bargaining cycles. Even small cracks can widen under pressure. And pressure is mounting fast. The league reportedly has not moved on key financial structures like the proposed salary cap figure. Revenue-sharing adjustments appear stalled. Housing guarantees were reportedly pushed into a future season rather than immediate expansion. Those are serious sticking points. From the union standpoint, that lack of movement may justify a hardline approach. But from the agent's standpoint, timing matters. If this season becomes collateral damage in a strategic gamble, who absorbs that loss? Ownership loses money, yes. But players lose rhythm. Young stars lose spotlight consistency. Bench players lose opportunities to prove themselves. And fringe roster players lose the most. Because for some, every game is a contract audition. So when agents intervene, it reframes the situation. This isn't just veterans versus young players. It becomes leadership versus individual career timelines. And that's where things get politically delicate. Because union leadership must project unity. They must project resolve. They must project clarity. But if enough players privately question strategy, projecting unity becomes harder. Now here's another layer that complicates this even more. Conflict of interest whispers. There has been quiet chatter surrounding certain high-profile players involved in external ventures, including alternative league projects and off-season competition structures. Now, there's no confirmed wrongdoing. But perception matters. If players at the top of union leadership are simultaneously involved in ventures that could benefit from league instability, even indirectly, suspicion grows. Even if that suspicion is unfair. Because in high-stakes negotiations, optics matter almost as much as facts. And once optics get murky, trust wobbles. Inside that meeting, when voices reportedly got heated, it may not have been just about salary cap numbers. It may have been about direction. About who truly benefits from delay. About who absorbs risk. About who controls the final call. And here's the key point. Strike authority isn't exercised by 144 players simultaneously. It's executed by a small executive committee. 7 individuals. 7 votes. 7 perspectives guiding the fate of an entire season. That concentration of authority becomes uncomfortable if consensus weakens. Because even if more than half reaffirm commitment to strike, that still leaves a substantial number uncertain. And uncertainty is the one thing unions cannot afford during public bargaining battles. Meanwhile, the league watches, calculates, waits. And as this tension builds internally, another factor looms over everything. One that no one inside the union can ignore. Because this entire negotiation is happening during the most commercially sensitive period in league history. The Caitlin Clark era. And whether anyone wants to say it out loud or not, her impact changes the equation entirely. And that's where this story becomes bigger than just union politics. Because once superstar economics enter the room, the stakes multiply. And what's at risk may be larger than a single CBA cycle. This negotiation isn't happening in a vacuum. And that's what makes it different. Because if this were 3 years ago, the dynamics might look completely different. The urgency, the timing, the risk tolerance, all of it would shift. But this isn't 3 years ago. This is the era of sold-out arenas. This is the era of record-breaking rookie jersey sales. This is the era of broadcast numbers that forced major networks to pay attention. And whether people like it or not, Caitlin Clark's arrival accelerated that shift. Now let's be clear, no single player built the WNBA alone. Veterans carried this league through years of limited exposure. Superstars before this generation laid the foundation brick by brick. But timing matters. And Clark's entrance into the league aligned with a perfect storm of cultural momentum. College stardom, viral highlights, endless debate cycles, social media traction that crossed into mainstream news. The league's visibility didn't just grow. It surged. Ticket demand spiked in markets that had never seen that kind of attention. Road arenas started selling out when certain teams came to town. Television ratings jumped in measurable ways. And corporate America noticed. Media rights discussions became more serious. Expansion plans accelerated. Sponsorship dollars followed audience numbers. The pie got bigger. Fast. Now here's where things get uncomfortable. When revenue grows quickly, expectations grow with it. Players look at attendance numbers and say, "We deserve a bigger share." Ownership looks at long-term sustainability and says, "Growth must stabilize before permanent increases." That tension is normal in labor negotiations. But what makes this different is momentum. Momentum is fragile. And if there's one thing leagues fear, it's stalling momentum during a breakout phase. This is where younger players may see the landscape differently than veterans. For a veteran who endured lean years, this boom feels like overdue validation, like the bill finally coming due. For a young star entering during the boom, this feels like the beginning of something that could expand even further. Two perspectives. Same league. Different emotional connection to timing. Now imagine you're a second-year player riding the wave of new national exposure. Your games are finally getting prime broadcast slots. Your social following is growing weekly. Endorsement conversations are opening up. And then you hear serious talk about a possible strike. You start calculating. If the season gets delayed, does the momentum cool? If casual fans drift away, do they come back? If media attention shifts to another sport during the gap, does the league regain that spotlight easily? Those are real fears, not emotional overreactions. Business realities. At the same time, veteran leaders may argue that this exact surge is why they must push hard now. If the league is benefiting from star-driven growth, then structural revenue sharing must reflect that immediately. Not later. Not next cycle. Now. That's the philosophical clash. One side says protect momentum. The other says capitalize on leverage. And both believe they're acting in the league's best interest. But here's another layer that complicates it even more. Public narrative. The WNBA has spent the last year battling criticism, debate, and national discourse. Some of it supportive, some of it hostile, some of it messy. Yet through all of it, the league stayed in headlines. Visibility, even when controversial, fueled awareness. If a labor dispute escalates publicly during this sensitive growth phase, the narrative could shift fast. Instead of talking about rising ratings and packed arenas, the headlines could become about division, strikes, and instability. That matters, because leagues that appear unstable scare off sponsors. And sponsors are watching closely right now. Now consider the optics of younger stars, particularly those directly tied to the recent ratings explosion, being associated with a work stoppage. Fair or not, public blame rarely distributes evenly. Fans don't analyze collective bargaining nuance. They react emotionally. If games stop, frustration spreads. And younger players who are still building brand loyalty may not want that attachment. Meanwhile, union leadership must think collectively, not individually. They can't negotiate based on one player's endorsement trajectory. They must fight for the entire roster pool. That includes bench players who may never see national commercials. It includes international players who depend heavily on base salary structures. It includes veterans whose earning window is closing. And that's where things get politically intense. Because superstar economics distort perception. When one or two players drive massive ticket demand, the question becomes, who benefits from that surge? Does that surge belong to the league infrastructure, to ownership investment, or directly to player labor? Revenue-sharing debates always circle back to that central issue. But timing is everything. If this CBA locks in improved revenue splits during a growth spike, players secure long-term gains. If they settle too quickly, some may feel they left money on the table. If they push too hard and momentum cools, the long-term pie might shrink. It's a strategic gamble either way. And that gamble is playing out while the entire sports world is watching. Because make no mistake, other leagues pay attention to moments like this. If the WNBA navigates this successfully, it sets precedent. If it implodes publicly, it becomes a cautionary tale. And that's why this isn't just a contract dispute. It's a crossroads moment. The Caitlin Clark era didn't create union tension, but it amplified its stakes. Everything feels bigger now. Every decision carries more weight. Every delay carries more risk. And inside that meeting, when players reportedly debated the path forward, this reality was hanging in the air. Unspoken, but undeniable. Because whether anyone says it publicly or not, the league is at its most commercially sensitive point in years. And that makes every internal crack more dangerous. But here's where it gets even more delicate. Because when money, power, and rapid growth collide, the final battle isn't just about strategy. It becomes about control. Control over messaging. Control over timing. Control over who truly speaks for the players. And that's where this situation may be heading next. At the center of all this noise is power. Because strip away the headlines, the meetings, the salary cap numbers, and the generational debate, and what you're left with is one uncomfortable question. Who actually controls the direction of this league right now? The players, the union leadership, the executive committee, or the small group empowered to call a strike on behalf of everyone else? That's where this becomes less about money and more about authority. Back in December, players authorized the possibility of a strike in what was described as a near-unanimous vote. That moment projected strength, solidarity, resolve. But authorization isn't execution. The power to actually pull the trigger sits with the union's executive committee, a small leadership group tasked with making the final call if negotiations break down. 7 individuals, 7 votes, 7 people potentially deciding whether an entire season moves forward or pauses. That's an enormous concentration of authority. And concentration of authority only works smoothly when trust is airtight. But what happens when trust wavers? What happens when some players begin recalculating risk differently? What happens when agents start applying pressure? What happens when younger stars privately question timing? Suddenly, leadership decisions carry more political weight. Because leadership must balance 2 things at once. Project unwavering unity to the league, while managing internal disagreement behind closed doors. That's a tightrope. And tightropes become dangerous when the wind picks up. Now let's talk about optics. Union leaders have publicly stated there is no fracture. That debate is healthy. That disagreement does not equal division. And technically that's true. Healthy unions do debate strategy. But when reports describe meetings as tense, when phrases like spirited and tough surface, when agents send letters, when players say fairness looks different depending on perspective, it signals friction. Not collapse, but friction. And friction during negotiations changes leverage. Because from the league's side of the table, any sign of hesitation weakens urgency. If management senses that players aren't fully aligned on striking, they may slow-roll concessions. They may hold firm on salary cap numbers. They may resist revenue share adjustments. Why? Because negotiation power is psychological as much as financial. And perception of unity drives pressure. Now add another layer. Whispers, speculation, concerns about potential conflicts of interest. There has been discussion, quiet but persistent, about certain high-profile players being involved in alternative ventures outside the traditional league structure. Again, no confirmed wrongdoing. But perception matters. If even a handful of players privately question whether leadership decisions benefit everyone equally, internal tension grows. Especially if some players feel the strategic gamble may not align with their personal timelines. Now here's where things get even more delicate. If younger stars feel their voices aren't carrying equal weight in leadership discussions, resentment builds silently. Not publicly, not dramatically, but internally. And silent resentment inside a union is far more dangerous than loud disagreement. Because loud disagreement can be resolved. Silent tension lingers. And remember, the WNBPA doesn't just represent superstars. It represents rookies fighting for roster spots, role players seeking stability, international veterans balancing overseas commitments, players at every tier. When interests diverge across tiers, leadership must thread a needle. Push too hard and risk alienating younger voices. Settle too quickly and risk disappointing veterans who've waited years for this leverage moment. This is why this negotiation cycle feels different. The league is growing rapidly. The player base is more visible than ever. Money conversations are louder than ever. And generational dynamics are sharper. So who really controls the next move? On paper, the executive committee holds strike authority. But in reality, power depends on collective backing. If enough players privately hesitate, leadership's confidence narrows. If enough agents whisper caution, momentum shifts. If enough young stars fear lost exposure, internal pressure rises. And if enough veterans feel this is their final leverage window, resolve hardens. It becomes a political chess match. Inside the union, not just across the negotiation table. Now here's the scenario no one wants to openly discuss. If the executive committee calls a strike, but internal unity isn't ironclad, the league could attempt to exploit that hesitation. Management could frame itself as reasonable, could highlight player division, could appeal to younger stars indirectly through public messaging. That's not hypothetical. That's negotiation strategy 101. And union leadership knows this. Which is why projecting solidarity publicly is crucial. But projection only works if it reflects reality. If cracks widen behind the scenes, messaging becomes harder to maintain. And that's why this moment is so pivotal. Because the next few weeks could determine more than just a salary structure. They could determine the balance of power inside the union itself. If leadership navigates this successfully, securing improved terms while preserving unity, they solidify credibility. If negotiations drag, the season faces delay, and internal dissatisfaction grows, leadership could face serious questions moving forward. This isn't just about one CBA. It's about trust. Trust between veterans and rookies. Trust between players and leadership. Trust between agents and union strategy. Trust between the league and its stars. And trust, once shaken, takes time to rebuild. But here's the final layer. This entire power struggle is unfolding during the most publicly scrutinized moment in league history. Every move is amplified. Every rumor spreads instantly. Every internal debate risks becoming national discussion. And that makes careful navigation more important than ever. Because if this moment spirals, the damage won't just be financial. It could reshape the culture inside the league. And that brings us to the real question. Is this negotiation cycle a breakthrough moment, or the beginning of a deeper fracture? Let's bring it home. This isn't just a labor dispute. It's a crossroads. The WNBA is growing faster than it has in years. Attendance is up. Visibility is up. National conversation is louder than ever. But growth moments are fragile. And how this union navigates internal tension could define the next decade. If veterans and young stars find common ground, this CBA could become a landmark victory. If internal division deepens, the fallout could extend beyond this season. Because once unity fractures publicly, rebuilding it takes time. And time is the one thing momentum doesn't always allow. The league stands at a turning point. Push too hard and risk cooling the surge. Settle too quickly and risk long-term structural regret. Balance is everything. But balance requires alignment. And right now, alignment appears to be under pressure. The next few weeks will reveal whether this was simply healthy debate, or the first sign of something much bigger. One thing is certain. This isn't over. And if you want the full breakdown as this situation unfolds, the real updates, the behind-the-scenes shifts, the moves nobody else is connecting, make sure you hit subscribe right now. Because this story is developing fast. And when the next decision drops, you're going to want to understand exactly what it means. Stay locked in.